The name JonBenet Ramsey has haunted America for nearly 3 decades. A 6-year-old girl found lifeless in her own home on the day after Christmas, left behind a trail of chilling clues, unanswered questions, and broken trust in the very system that was supposed to protect her. Her death wasn't just a family tragedy. It became a public obsession, marked by wild theories, police missteps, and a media frenzy that tore reputations apart. Today, with new technology and shocking revelations, the truth seems closer than ever, but what's being uncovered is darker than anyone could have imagined. The Christmas that changed everything. December 25th, 1996. Should have been another festive night for the Ramsey family in Boulder, Colorado. John and Patsy Ramsey had taken their 2 children, 9-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenet, to a friend's house for Christmas dinner. They returned home late that evening, with Patsy tucking her daughter into bed before going to sleep herself. The Ramseys lived in a large 3-story home that reflected John's business success as the president of Access Graphics, a company that had just crossed $1 billion in gross revenue. On the surface, the family had everything: wealth, status, and a picture-perfect image that was often admired by neighbors. But the next morning, everything changed. Around 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey discovered a strange, lengthy ransom note on the staircase. It demanded a very specific amount of money, $118,000, the same as John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus. Unlike most ransom notes, it wasn't short or vague. It stretched over 2.5 pages, written on Patsy's own notepad with one of her pens. Alarmed and panicked, Patsy called 911, believing her daughter had been kidnapped. When police arrived, they made their first fatal mistake. They treated the house as a kidnapping scene instead of a possible homicide. Only JonBenet's bedroom was cordoned off. Family, friends, and visitors were allowed to come and go, contaminating potential evidence across the entire home. Hours later, in one of the most tragic moments in true crime history, John Ramsey himself discovered his daughter's body in the basement. She had been struck on the head, strangled with a homemade garrote fashioned from a cord and part of a broken paintbrush, and her mouth was sealed with duct tape. The coroner later ruled her death a homicide, caused by asphyxia and cranial trauma. In that instant, the Ramseys' picture-perfect life shattered forever. The botched investigation and early suspicions. From the very beginning, the investigation into JonBenet Ramsey's death was plagued with errors that would haunt the case for decades. Boulder police, inexperienced with homicides of this scale, failed to secure the Ramsey home properly. Friends, neighbors, and even ministers walked freely through the house, potentially destroying or contaminating crucial evidence. When John Ramsey carried his daughter's body upstairs after finding her in the basement, whatever forensic evidence remained on her or the crime scene was compromised forever. The ransom note became one of the most unusual and debated pieces of evidence. It was unusually long, highly detailed, and written on paper from inside the Ramsey home. Experts debated whether it had been staged, possibly to mislead investigators. The strange amount, $118,000, matched John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, raising suspicions that the writer had specific knowledge of the family's finances. For many, this detail pointed directly toward someone inside the home. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on the Ramseys themselves. Law enforcement and the media speculated that Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, might have written the note to cover up an accident involving her daughter. Others whispered about Burke, JonBenet's 9-year-old brother, suggesting he might have harmed her in a fit of childish anger and that the parents staged a kidnapping to protect him. Investigators interviewed John and Patsy together instead of separately, another critical misstep, allowing them to hear and potentially influence each other's answers. The autopsy report only made the case more complicated. JonBenet had clear signs of head trauma and strangulation, but some of the other findings were less conclusive and left room for debate. Investigators also noted that fibers from Patsy Ramsey's clothing appeared on the duct tape recovered from the scene, adding fuel to suspicions. Yet, in 1998, DNA testing revealed something unexpected: the presence of an unidentified male's DNA on JonBenet's clothing, evidence that did not match John, Patsy, Burke, or anyone else in the family. Despite this, public suspicion against the family only grew. In 1999, a grand jury secretly voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and being accessories to a crime. But District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence. For years, this detail remained hidden, only revealed to the public more than a decade later. The damage, however, was already done. The Ramseys were branded as suspects in the public eye, even after DNA evidence would eventually clear them. The wild suspects, false confessions, and DNA breakthroughs. As the years dragged on, the case became a magnet for speculation, false confessions, and suspects who seemed convincing at first, but ultimately led nowhere. Every few years, a new theory or a strange character emerged, keeping the tragedy alive in headlines, but never bringing true closure. One of the earliest figures of interest was Bill McReynolds, a family friend who dressed as Santa Claus for neighborhood children and had visited the Ramseys just days before Christmas. He admitted he felt a special bond with JonBenet, even keeping glitter she had given him, which he wanted mixed into his ashes after his death. Though unsettling to many, there was never concrete evidence tying him to the crime. Another man, Gary Oliva, a convicted pedophile who lived near the Ramseys, also drew suspicion. Shortly after JonBenet's death, he allegedly called a friend, confessing he had hurt a little girl. Yet, once again, DNA excluded him. The most dramatic twist came in 2006 when an American school teacher, John Mark Carr, was arrested in Bangkok, Thailand. He claimed he was with JonBenet the night she died, that he loved her, and that her death was an accident. His story was detailed enough to spark global headlines, but the relief of a supposed breakthrough was short-lived. DNA evidence quickly proved he had nothing to do with the crime. Prosecutors dropped all charges, and Carr's disturbing obsession was dismissed as a delusion rather than a confession. Meanwhile, scientific progress quietly began changing the direction of the investigation. By 2003, forensic testing revealed foreign male DNA on JonBenet's clothing, DNA that did not match anyone in the Ramsey family or known suspects. This was a crucial moment. In 2008, Boulder authorities publicly cleared John and Patsy Ramsey, formally apologizing for the years of suspicion and confirming that the DNA evidence pointed away from them. Tragically, Patsy never lived to hear this apology. She died of ovarian cancer in 2006 at the age of 49, carrying the weight of public accusation until her final days. Even with the family cleared, the identity of the mysterious male DNA remained unknown. Investigators were left with partial genetic material, tiny fragments too weak for full identification by 1990s standards. But science was evolving, and with it came a tool that would eventually change everything: genetic genealogy. The rise of genetic genealogy and the 2024 breakthrough. By the time JonBenet's case entered its third decade, hope seemed to be fading. Nearly 1,000 DNA samples had been tested, more than 21,000 tips investigated, and countless suspects examined, all with no arrest. For many, it felt as if the case was doomed to remain unsolved forever. But the steady march of science offered a glimmer of hope. In the 2010s, a revolutionary method called genetic genealogy began solving cold cases once thought impossible. This approach combined DNA profiling with family tree research. Even if a suspect had never submitted DNA, distant relatives might have, through ancestry websites or genetic testing services. By analyzing these connections, investigators could slowly piece together family trees, narrowing down the list of possible suspects until they found their target. High-profile successes, like the arrest of the Golden State Killer in 2018, proved how powerful this method could be. Soon, families of other victims began demanding the same technology be applied to their cases. Among them was John Ramsey, who by the 2020s had relocated to Utah but never stopped pushing for justice for his daughter. He criticized Boulder police for clinging to outdated methods and pleaded with them to allow outside experts to help. Finally, in 2024, Boulder police partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, one of the leading companies in genetic genealogy. Using the tiny fragments of DNA preserved from JonBenet's clothing, experts created a much stronger profile and uploaded it into public genealogy databases. At first, only distant relatives appeared. Cousins, several generations removed. But that was enough to start building the puzzle. Over months, researchers cross-referenced DNA results with public records, birth and marriage certificates, and even social media. Slowly, a picture began to form. The trail led to one man. In 1996, he had been 34 years old, living just 2 miles from the Ramsey home. He worked for a catering company that regularly serviced parties in the Ramsey neighborhood, including one just doors away from the family home that holiday season. By 2024, he was in his early 60s, having drifted across several states, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, and eventually Washington. He had prior arrests for burglary and fraud, but nothing that marked him as violent or predatory. For decades, he had lived in the shadows, never considered a suspect. When investigators covertly collected his discarded DNA from a coffee cup and cigarette butt, the results were undeniable. It matched the DNA on JonBenet's clothing with near-perfect certainty. After nearly 3 decades, the unknown male was no longer a mystery. The shocking evidence against the new suspect and police missteps exposed. When investigators confirmed the DNA match in 2024, they quietly moved to gather more evidence before making a formal arrest. A search of the suspect's residence and a rented storage unit uncovered disturbing items that linked him back to 1996. Among them was an old jacket containing fibers consistent with those found on JonBenet's clothing, a chilling detail that suggested close contact on the night she died. Forensic experts also revisited the infamous ransom note, this time using advanced handwriting analysis software. Patterns in the writing were compared against employment records and personal notes from the suspect's past. The similarities were striking, reinforcing the possibility that he was the one who left behind the bizarre 2.5-page message. The implications were devastating. For almost 3 decades, the Ramsey family had lived under suspicion, subjected to public scrutiny and relentless accusations. Meanwhile, the true killer had walked free, blending into new communities across the country. The revelation that he had once worked just doors away from the Ramsey home only intensified the tragedy. It suggested that JonBenet's fate may not have been random at all, but the result of someone lurking nearby, watching the family and learning their routines. What made the situation worse was the realization of how much had been mishandled from the beginning. The suitcase found under the broken basement window, the rope near JonBenet's room that was never tested, the contaminated crime scene, each oversight represented a missed chance to catch him sooner. Even more damning was the case of another little girl attacked in Boulder just 9 months after JonBenet's murder. She survived, and investigators ignored the possibility of a connection, even discarding her bedsheets that might have contained DNA evidence. Looking back, the similarities are haunting. Both victims were young girls, both were attacked in their homes, and both had ties to JonBenet through dance classes. If these leads had been properly pursued, the killer might have been identified decades earlier, sparing the Ramsey family years of suspicion and grief. Instead, the tragedy was compounded, not only by the loss of a child, but by the failures of a system that should have protected her. By the time the suspect was finally identified, Patsy Ramsey had already passed away, never able to see her family cleared completely in the eyes of the public. For John Ramsey and his surviving children, the discovery offered relief, but also reopened wounds that had never healed. The legacy of JonBenet, Burke's silence, and the unanswered questions. Even as the new suspect came into focus, the JonBenet Ramsey case remained more than a police file. It was a story of shattered lives, unanswered questions, and a family forever marked by suspicion. For years, Burke Ramsey, just 9 years old at the time of his sister's death, avoided the spotlight entirely. His refusal to speak publicly only fueled speculation, with some accusing him despite the lack of evidence. It wasn't until almost 3 decades later, in his late 30s, that Burke finally broke his silence. He described the toll of living under constant rumor, the pain of watching his parents vilified, and the haunting absence of the sister who once filled their home with laughter. Burke defended his parents, emphasizing that John and Patsy had been overwhelmed by grief and public blame. He criticized investigators for interviewing his parents together, a decision that fueled suspicion but violated standard practice. Most of all, he stressed his hope that advances in DNA testing would finally bring justice, not just to clear the family's name, but to honor his sister's memory. His words reminded the world that behind the theories and headlines was a real child whose life had been stolen. JonBenet herself was remembered not just as a victim, but as a vibrant little girl who loved to perform. By the age of 6, she had already won multiple beauty titles, from Little Miss Colorado to National Tiny Miss Beauty. She adored dressing up, singing, and dancing, encouraged by her pageant-loving mother and admired by her father and brother. Her bright smile and boundless energy became frozen in photographs, a symbol of innocence lost too soon. Yet even with the suspect identified, questions still linger. Why was the ransom note written at all if JonBenet's body was left in the house? Did the killer act alone, or did he have help? Was her murder premeditated or the result of a botched burglary gone too far? These uncertainties ensure that the case continues to live in public consciousness, a reminder of how fragile justice can be when mistakes are made in the first crucial hours. For John Ramsey, now in his 80s, the fight has never truly ended. He remains committed to seeing the case resolved, even if the answers are darker than anyone ever imagined. What happened in that Boulder home was not only a family's tragedy, it became a national obsession, one that revealed the cracks in America's criminal justice system. Nearly 3 decades later, JonBenet Ramsey's story still grips us because it was never just about one child. It was about trust lost, evidence mishandled, and the haunting possibility that justice may never feel complete. Do you believe the real killer has finally been found, or are there still secrets hiding in this case? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.